Nobody in the Klondike believed the number when it first came through. Miners read it twice, then a third time, convinced someone had added an extra zero by mistake. The word going around was that a young operator named Colt Bracken had pulled roughly $320 million in gold out of the ground in a single season. In an industry where a great year might bring in 5 to 10 million, that number didn't just raise eyebrows, it broke the scale entirely. And the strangest part was that it hadn't come from one lucky nugget or a freak jackpot. It came from an excavator bucket hitting something nobody on site was prepared for, a layer of ground so rich that the crew standing around the machine went completely silent. If you want to know exactly what that excavator hit and how it turned into the biggest season anyone in that valley had ever recorded, stay with this video, because what happened next changed the way an entire region thought about placer mining. Every mining season in the north starts the same way. The snow softens, the machines sit quiet for a few more weeks, and crews look back at last year's numbers while they plan the next run. For Colt Bracken, this particular season felt different from the start. The year before, his operation had pulled around 7,000 ounces, worth close to $14 million. Solid, respectable, nothing to be ashamed of. But Colt kept turning one thought over in his head all winter. The real limit on a season wasn't how much gold sat in the ground. It was how much paid dirt you could actually move and how much of that gold you could actually capture. If he could scale the operation up and tighten the recovery process, the same kind of ground could produce several times what it had before. That idea turned into a plan long before the first machine fired up. Colt sat down with his lead engineers and foremen and ran the numbers over and over. If they could process somewhere between 45 and 50,000 cubic yards of dirt a week and hold an average recovery close to a full ounce per yard, the math pointed towards something over 140,000 ounces by the end of the season. At gold prices sitting around $2,200 an ounce, that put the total value somewhere in the $300 million range. It looked almost absurd on paper. But Colt wasn't interested in a modest bump. He decided to commit to it fully, putting close to $40 million into new machinery, wash plants, and site infrastructure, and building out a crew of more than 200 people to run the operation around the clock. Before any of that money meant anything, Colt needed ground that could actually support it. He spent months before the season combing through old geological surveys, looking past the claims everyone already knew about and focusing on areas that had been written off years earlier for being too deep or too difficult to work. One stretch in particular caught his attention, an old buried river channel that had never really been dug out properly. Rather than gambling the whole season on a hunch, he brought in drill crews first, spending close to $2 million on test holes that reached 80 to 100 feet down. When the lab results started coming back, some samples were showing close to a full ounce of gold per cubic yard, numbers that most operations would consider extraordinary if they saw them even once in a season. Cole told his team plainly that if this pattern held across the whole claim, they might be sitting on one of the richest stretches of ground anyone had touched in years. With the ground confirmed, the next decision was how big to go. Colt chose to go all in. Large excavators, dozers, and haul trucks were brought onto site, machines capable of moving thousands of yards of material a day. He installed custom wash plants engineered to handle hundreds of tons of material an hour, complete with dedicated pump systems, pipelines, and settling ponds so the whole operation could run without stopping. Diesel alone was burning through the budget at tens of thousands of dollars a day, and the crew, now well over 150 strong, worked in rotating shifts so the plants never sat idle. Colt's reasoning was simple. Ground this rich deserve an operation big enough to actually take advantage of it, because working it slowly with a small crew would have left a fortune sitting untouched underground. Rather than running everything from a single pit, Colt split the operation across 4 separate sites, each one handling a different role. One site focused on the shallower, easier-to-reach paved dirt for quick, steady recovery. A second pushed deeper, chasing that rich buried channel the drill tests had flagged. A third became the main processing hub, where wash plants ran dirt trucked in from the other locations. The fourth stayed flexible, ready to shift crews and machines wherever the richest ground turned up that week. Running 4 sites at once meant serious logistics. Every site reported daily numbers, yardage processed, ounces recovered, equipment status, and Colt's team adjusted machine placement each morning based on where the ground was performing best. The payoff was that the operation almost never stalled. If one site hit a mechanical problem or thinner ground, the others simply picked up the slack, and combined daily output across all 4 sites started climbing toward 800 to 1,000 ounces a day, numbers that stopped other miners in their tracks when word got around. None of that mattered without solid recovery, though, and Colt knew it. A rich claim is worthless if fine gold slips out with the tailings, which is exactly what happens at most operations that aren't paying close attention. His wash plants were built specifically to catch that fine material, using layered sluice systems, specialized matting, and multi-stage refining most operations don't bother installing. Where a typical placer setup might lose 10 to 15% of its gold in the tailings, Colt's team pushed that loss down under 5%. On a small operation, that difference barely registers. Across an operation processing tens of thousands of yards a week, it adds up to a genuinely staggering amount of extra gold, and it's a big part of why Colt's recoveries were running 30 to 40% higher than comparable operations nearby. The real turning point came once the excavators finally reached that deep buried channel. The upper layers had been ordinary ground with the occasional trace of color, nothing unusual. But once the machines pushed down towards 70, then 80, then 100 feet, everything changed. The first big cleanup from that depth processed around 400 cubic yards, and the crew was expecting maybe 120 to 150 ounces, already a strong number. Instead, the cleanup table produced close to 360 ounces from that single load. For a moment, nobody on site said a word. Someone rechecked the scale, then rechecked it again, certain something had to be wrong. It wasn't. The ground itself was carrying close to a full ounce of gold per cubic yard, a density most placer miners will go their entire careers without seeing even once. A geologist who examined the samples later explained that the gold was coarse and heavy, the kind of material that only settles when a powerful ancient river deposits it over a long stretch of time, then buries it under layers of sediment for millennia. From that point forward, the pace of the operation changed completely. Cleanups that used to happen weekly were now producing results almost every single day. Daily recoveries climbed to around 600 ounces early on, which at the time worked out to well over $1 million a day. Then came a day that pulled in closer to 920 ounces, and not long after that, a single day's total crossed 1,000 ounces. The gold room started running out of room to store everything safely, and armored transport had to be scheduled more often just to keep up. Word spread fast through the region. Veteran miners who had worked the ground for decades came out just to see the operation for themselves, several of them saying afterward they had never seen a single site produce numbers like that day after day. Running an operation at that scale came with real risk the whole time, and Colt's team felt it every single day. Daily costs sat somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000 once fuel, maintenance, payroll, and logistics were all added up, meaning a shutdown of even a few days could cost the operation millions. Heavy equipment running 24 hours a day inevitably breaks down, and when one of the main excavators failed partway through the season, Colt didn't hesitate, ordering a replacement worth close to $2 million just to keep the pace from slipping. Weather was its own threat entirely. A heavy rain could flood a pit overnight, and saturated ground near a cut always carried the risk of slope failure that could trap equipment or force a site to shut down completely. Engineers monitored ground conditions constantly, and pump systems stood ready at every site because Cole understood that one bad call, one missed warning sign, could undo months of work in a single afternoon. When the season finally wound down and the last machines went quiet, the real number came from totaling every cleanup across every site. The combined recovery landed at roughly 145,000 ounces of gold, at an average price near $2,200 an ounce. That put the season's total value right around $319 to $320 million, a figure that spread through the mining community almost overnight. Revenue never tells the whole story, though. The season's initial investment in machinery and infrastructure had run around $40 to $45 million, and operating costs across the season, covering wages, fuel, maintenance, and logistics, added up to somewhere between 80 and 90 million more. All told, expenses landed close to $130 million, still leaving an enormous profit once everything was accounted for. One that instantly reshaped how people talked about Colt Bracken as an operator. The reaction across the wider mining world was immediate. Experienced operators who had spent decades in the business admitted they had never seen a single-season recovery on that scale from a placer operation. Industry publications picked up the story, and other miners who had built careers on smaller, steadier operations started openly reconsidering their own approach, digging into old records for deeper ground that had been passed over for years, and investing in better recovery systems to squeeze more value out of dirt they were already processing. The season proved something the industry had mostly assumed wasn't possible, that placer mining, historically viewed as a smaller-scale pursuit compared to hard rock operations, could produce results in the hundreds of millions of dollars when the right ground, the right technology, and the right scale of investment all came together at once. For Colt himself, the number was almost secondary to what it represented. This was a young operator who had spent years running modest seasons, taking calculated risks, and betting on ground other people had already written off, finally seeing that patience and preparation pay off in a way few in the business ever get to experience. Whether or not another season ever reaches those same numbers again, that one run through the buried channel is the kind of story that sticks with an industry for years. The moment everyone realized the real ceiling on a mining operation was never really the ground. It was how far someone was willing to push to find out what was actually underneath it.